Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Ryan. I will be running the Q&A. We'll be talking for about 10 minutes, and then we'll take a few questions from you guys. Thank you all for coming. First, let me bring out Lauren Greenfield.
Thank you.
You good?
Yeah.
So, Lauren, watching this film, it felt like a retrospective of your work, and you say as much in the film. One of the questions I had watching it was, you've spent decades documenting wealth and excess and greed. Have you noticed that those things are accelerating in American culture?
I definitely did see an acceleration, and a big part of why I went back to the early work and kind of tracked back to the 90s and the kids in LA is because a lot of the things I was seeing in kind of extreme blown up form, I saw kind of the beginnings of in that work in the 90s. And a big driver was the media and popular culture. And in the early 90s, it was about MTV and hip hop. And in a way, that was the driver of materialism across class, across race, across region. And then with cable channels and then the internet and reality TV and social media, it all just kind of blew up.
Does it feel bleak to you as you're doing this work now compared to how it was before? You're saying it's getting faster, it's getting worse. Like, do you ever feel like you just kind of want to lay down flat on your face and not move?
Well, you can probably tell that's not exactly my personality. But I mean, I think it is really bleak, and that's why Chris Hedges is in there kind of saying that we're hurtling towards the apocalypse. But that's not where I end the film, because I also felt that there was hope in what the subjects learned in these journeys and what I learned, and kind of this idea that out of the terrible kind of crashes and collapses, there could be insight and there could be change and agency out of that. And so in a way, it became a story about legacy versus agency and kind of what we inherit and what we get from the culture, but then also having a choice about what we want to pass on.
Mm-hmm. So watching the film, there are a few subjects that tracking their long trajectory, it was sort of difficult to watch, like the woman who was the adult film star who had been partying with Charlie Sheen, and then she changed her whole body, and then she had a miscarriage and is back in Oregon at the end. Were there any things that you have photographed during your career or any subjects that, looking back, it's difficult for you to watch?
Well, I think the Davney story is a really hard story, and thank you for going with it. I felt like it was really important to show kind of the consequences of the commodification of the female body. And I chose Davney because I had photographed a lot of women who were kind of at the top of their game in either sex work or some kind of related thing. And they were really happy to be able to make so much money and kind of leverage their body. And I felt like I needed to kind of look a little bit further down the line at what the consequence was. Because when I first met Casey, she was super happy, height of her fame, had just had the bender with Charlie Sheen, was very in demand, and in also really devastating way was in demand because she looked like a little girl. And so there were so many complexities of her story, but basically it had really devastating consequences for her, and I think for all of us, and kind of the way she's dehumanized. So it is a really hard story, but I feel like it's an important story, and I think she is also so kind of charismatic and charming, and has a kind of hopeful innocence about her too, even though she's seen such terrible things.
And going back to another subject that is kind of pushes the audience. When you were documenting women with eating disorders, you mentioned in the film that one of your subjects told you that your addiction was work. And that made me think, like, is every drive inherently something bad? Every drive to obtain or achieve, is it always bad, or is there a way to jujitsu it into something good?
I mean, definitely not. And I also really love my work, and it's, like I said, in the end, it's also what gives my life meaning, so I wouldn't trade that for anything. I was trying to kind of look at, but what you see in the film is kind of the psychology of the drive. And so there's nothing wrong with the work or even the money. I think the therapist said at one point, it's not money is not the root of all evil. It's money without values. And I think for the, whether it's making money or losing weight or getting younger or doing work, it wasn't so much the thing. It was more the addiction to it and why people wanted it. That in a way, everybody had a kind of emptiness that they were trying to fill with something that couldn't fill it. And so they just kept going for more. Like with Florian, he was super smart and kind of loved numbers, but it wasn't about that. It was about going for more, and he couldn't stop. It's like his son said he could have retired. So, I definitely did not want to make a direct comparison between my struggles and the subjects because theirs are so kind of life and death. But I wanted to more show that I learned along the way, and also that I could identify with, like, that there were similarities, and that by my kind of going into their lives, I saw mirrors in my own life.
And that's something that I really appreciated about the film. You were documenting these people who were spectacles, but you had, spectacles, not like glasses, like, something that was kind of out of the ordinary, something that was an extreme, but you didn't seem to do it in a point and laugh kind of way. And I noticed when, watching your films, there's always like a moment when the audience is deciding whether or not they feel bad for the person that they're looking at, or if they laugh. And the laughter almost feels like something uncomfortable. Are there any subjects that you've followed throughout the years that have made you laugh?
I hope people laugh in the film. I definitely was conscious of making kind of funny parts, but I feel like the laughter kind of brings you in. But then I want people to really get into the characters and see their humanity too. And I feel like with following them, the thing that's really unique for me about film is the ability it has to make you empathize and to kind of stand in their shoes in a way a lot more than in the photography. And so even though you might laugh in the beginning, I think that you can also kind of identify with them too, to a point.
Have there ever been any subjects that you've followed through your work that you've found yourself actually kind of non-ironically and sincerely wanting what they had?
I don't know. I don't think I normally think about it that way, but I definitely have felt, in a way, the desires of almost all of the subjects. And I think I tried to show kind of that's what brings me to them, that it was like being in high school and being in a fancy school and wanting what the other kids had, but also knowing I shouldn't want that kind of piqued my interest in why we want those things. And same with body image. It was like I was never anorexic, but I definitely thought about body image and had my own insecurities, and I think that kind of led me to that. But I'm sure that there are, clothes or whatever that I've seen and I've been like, oh, that's cool. I feel like I kind of have to have that desire to be able to document the desire. I don't own a Birkin bag.
They're really nice. One of the things that I've noticed is that it seemed like the women that you documented had a lot more self-awareness and personal journeys than the men that were documented. And that's not to say that men have not necessarily grown, but specifically looking back at you documenting teenagers in Santa Monica, the girl who had the best body was this kind of very self-aware, almost like Earth Mother, nurturing being who understood how it had damaged her. And then, you kind of cut to those guys and there's still these kind of Neanderthals eating bugs off of each other. So is that a pattern you notice, or is that something that's just in this film?
I actually don't think that part is a gender thing. I think that's exactly true with Mijanou and the boys, and that she has this huge development where she kind of takes what she saw when she was young and decides to go as far away from it as possible and raise her kids in a completely different way. And then the boys have no development at all. They're just kind of the same guys they always were. But I think that Florian sees really clearly, for me, he's a truth teller. And I think Kathy never really sees it the way we see it. So I think it kind of depends. Paris and Gmo also have a lot of perspective by the end. And I've always kind of the subjects have always been the truth tellers in my work. That was kind of a big surprise from the beginning, and it started with the 13-year-old Adam, who's at the bar mitzvah at the Whiskey A Go-Go with his face kind of in the breasts of the go-go dancer, and he says, you have to have a big bar mitzvah, you have to spend $50,000, but then he says money ruins kids, and he thought money ruined him. So it was amazing for me to hear him in the eye of the storm, completely caught up in it all, but also have that perspective. And in a way, that's kind of what I'm depending on.
Going back to Florian. Florian's son seemed like a very, he had less damage to him that it seemed like he should have had given his life. How did you get the girlfriend to be in those sessions with you guys?
You know, I had no idea what the girlfriend was going to give in the film. Conrad wanted her there because I think he does kind of carry a lot of pain with him for what's happened with his dad. I think his mom he has a great mom, so he's okay. But he was, I think, nervous about doing this alone, and so he really wanted her there. And I had never met her, and I just had no idea what it would be like. We decided to do this 2-person interview without really knowing what it would give, and it turned out her nonverbal expressions were just documentary gold.
Yeah, those are like incredibly expressive, small expressions. Going back to what you were saying at the beginning about, or what we were talking about acceleration of greed, looking at the current political climate, specifically the current administration, do you see the Trump presidency as an inevitable outcome to the culture that you've been witnessing for 25 years?
I mean, yes, in retrospect. I wish I could have said I saw this coming, but I didn't. And yet, looking back, it does seem like the kind of ultimate expression of what I've been documenting and the kind of apotheosis of generation wealth in so many ways, from the idealizing of the rich and kind of putting them up on a pedestal to the reality TV show and kind of the fame, currency of fame, to a love for gold and kind of the architecture that I've heard called dictator chic, to trafficking in women, the kind of beauty pageants piece, and beautiful women being an expression of success, to the fake it till you make it, like never having been in that job and just kind of winging it. So I do think he's important. I didn't want him to also take over the movie. It's not about him. It's really about the 25 years. And so what I tried to do was kind of show the culture that made him possible.
One thing that I thought was really interesting is how the Seagulls are supporters of Donald Trump, despite the fact that the pursuit of what he embodies has led to their ruin. Did you find yourself coming across people who just couldn't learn, or just had everything right in front of them, who couldn't?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the inspirations for the project. Is after I did Queen of Versailles, I thought everybody, including the Seagulls, had learned their lessons from the crash. I mean, David Siegel says at the end, we shouldn't have built so big. Should have been happy with what we had. Jackie says, I'd be happy in a 2-bedroom. All that matters is family. And yet, after the crash, when they were able to borrow again, they got the house back and they started trying to finish it again. And now it's been, I think, 12 years, and it's still far from finishing, but it's like Sisyphus going up that hill.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of like the point of going to therapy is so you don't repeat the same things.
But in a way, we kind of, I mean, also after we bailed out the banks, we're kind of going towards the same thing too, getting rid of the regulations. It feels like a bubble. So I kind of, going back to that addiction metaphor, also felt like it was a kind of a relapse, and that in a way we couldn't recover until we really had a big crash and then made change. And so like in Iceland, the fisherman kind of stands for that, because in Iceland, after the crash, they used it as an opportunity to rethink their culture and realize they had lost their way, lost their moral compass, and make changes.
One more question before we're opening it up to the audience. One thing I noticed in the film was that there's this through line of a sort of meditation on motherhood or parenthood. Is that something you intended to do when you started making the film?
No, I wasn't really thinking about that when I began, but we called it Generation Wealth in the beginning, thinking more about the generation. And then it really did kind of turn into a film about parenting and values and legacy versus agency in a way. And I think when I was thinking about why I started doing this, I was really thinking about my parents trying to give me values that were really at odds with what I was seeing in the culture, and kind of me wanting what was in the culture, but also having that kind of check on, should I want that from my parents? And so by the time I was making the film, my eldest, Noah, was the same age that I was when I went to that school. So it just made me start to think a lot about what we pass on, what we get from our parents, and kind of how that forms our values with regard what we're looking for.
I mean, that seemed like a very hopeful aspect of the film, that people were able to find fulfillment and happiness, and not perfect happiness, but some form of fulfillment that wasn't consumption based around parenting.
Well, I mean, and that in a way is the moral of the story with the end, and what so many of the subjects came to after these kind of crazy journeys is that what really mattered was family and friends and love and community. And in a way, the things that we already know, of course, like money can't buy you happiness and all you need is love, but we don't necessarily live by them. And certainly most of the subjects in the film didn't live by them.
Well, thank you for answering my questions. Now we're going to we're going to have the audience ask some questions. I think we have time for 3.
So my question is, it seems amazing to me how these people were willing to expose even really negative things about themselves, like Florian. So I wonder if you think this is a change in our culture. They want attention, regardless of its negative attention, or if they're, coming off as really horrible people.
I mean, I don't think it's so simple as wanting attention. Like, I think with Florian, I think he also really felt like he was paying the price for losing his way and making mistakes, and seeing that this was a through line of a lot of people that he knew. And I think he genuinely kind of wanted to pass on the knowledge of that. And, also he was in a really low place, so he had nothing to lose. And, maybe it was an interesting thing for him to do. But I don't think it was just the attention. I think there was a feeling. And I think that with a lot of the subjects, like Mijanu really doesn't want any kind of fame anymore. She's really genuine and kind of getting off the grid and unplugging. And I think she had to really think hard about whether she was willing to be filmed. But I think she did see the value in the project and wanted to tell her story.
First of all, I think you're a brilliant filmmaker. I loved Queen of Versailles, and this is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And my question is, you're very honest about your own self, yourself as a parent and as a partner. And I wonder how that was for you, and also what impact it made on your family, turning them into subjects.
Well, first of all, I should introduce my husband and producer, Frank Evers. I mean, it was a hard decision to be in the film. It wasn't something that we were planning in the beginning. In fact, we were kind of both against it in the beginning. I started having my voice in because I did feel like my relationships with the subjects is a really important part of the process, and I wanted to show that. I think turning 50, I also just felt like I could be a little bit more transparent about the process. In the past, I've always wanted to kind of hide my part in it, not have my voice, and I think I loosened up a little bit about that. And I think that, I started out just as a kind of narrator because I felt like I needed to be the connective tissue. I wanted to show really different characters coming from really different places. And in a way, the only thing that connected them besides my ideas was my journey, my kind of physical journey. And so I made a decision to kind of have that part of it be the backbone of the story. But the kind of personal things that kind of came out of it, and my relating, kind of discovering my own addiction in a way, and how that impacted my family and where that came from, I just felt like that's kind of how I learned from the subjects. That with Florian saying, You know, how can a 100-hour work week not affect your relationship with anything that matters? And he was kind of looking at me like, I have your number, which he did. And I just felt like, okay, they're going to these really kind of vulnerable places. I should be willing to do the same if it kind of moves the story forward. And I guess that's it. I just felt like, in a way, the other thing was that the characters in a way are very extreme. Like, they're not necessarily who you would meet in your everyday life. The billionaire hedge fund banker, the porn star, the beauty pageant girl. And I didn't want you to see the film and think this is about somebody else out there, like Queen of Versailles, somebody who's got this crazy life. I really felt like we're all complicit in this generation wealth, and by kind of bringing out my own complicity and how it affects me, that in a way that I could help bring the audience on that journey too.
Yeah, that was like awesome. Thank you so much. And I was just wondering, like, with all the interviews you do, you come across all kinds of different people. And is it hard to kind of get out of your head any prejudice you might have going into the interview and to approach it with objectivity? And when you're talking to someone who's just these people of like insanely high stature and that kind of stuff, is it hard to not feel like intimidated and to put all that kind of thing aside when you go in for it?
You know, I kind of let myself feel all those things. Like, I think when I'm talking to David Siegel or when I'm talking to Florian, part of the fun is, you know, kind of these powerful men like telling you their secrets. I mean, I think I kind of fell in love with David Siegel in a way when he was telling me things he hadn't even told his wife, and I'm getting to hear what it's like to be this timeshare mogul. I mean, that's kind of the excitement. So I don't necessarily try to be objective. I try to really connect with them and understand what makes them tick and what makes them make the choices they do, and kind of see their humanity. I think that's the bigger thing, is it's not so much being objective, but I try to be really non-judgmental and try to go in trying to understand kind of why they do what they do. And hopefully, even though some of the characters are in these really extreme situations, hoping that, you know, you'll also come along for the ride and get to know them and have their kind of experience teach us something about ours.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to Lauren Greenfield.
Thank you.
Have a great night.